everybody on earth died. And God himself came outside the gates of heaven. And he said, all right now, all right, heads up, let's get organized here. I want all the men who dominated their wives to line up in a row right here. And I want all the men who were whips to their wives to line up in a row right here. And all the women, you go with St. Peter around the corner. Now everybody, let's get organized. I'll be back in a minute. So, when God came back, the line of men that had been whips to their wives went on beyond the horizon. There was thousands and thousands of men. You couldn't see the end of the line. And the line that had dominated their wives had one man standing in it. And God came out and said, what's the matter here? I made you all in my image. And you couldn't dominate your wife? I'm ashamed of you all. Now here's a man that did. Young man, tell me and tell everybody else how you happen to find yourself in this line. And the man said, I don't know, my wife told me to stay here. As usual, the fire marshal wants you to know there's another door in the back, the washroom is in the back, the water cooler's in the back. Landlord wants you to know that there's another parking lot to the north and east of here. It's flat, it's level, it's lit, it's limited access. There must be 60 places back there. You will never have a problem parking when you come to the Comedy Playhouse. And I want you to know in the front corner are the concessions. There's water, there's soda, there's candy, there's chips. It's all $1. Buy something. Stimulate my economy, balance my budget. And next to the wine, as usual, next to the concessions, as usual, is the wine. The wine is complimentary, it's on the house. Cheers to my theater friends, guaranteed to make the show funnier. And next to the wine is a sign-up sheet for the newsletter. If you'd like to know what's going on around here, what's playing, what's coming in next, a little about the actors, probably a joke or two, give me your name, your email address, I'll add you to the newsletter. It goes out once a month. I don't sell the list, I don't share the list. In return, you're part of the deal. If you like what you sell, well, if you like what you see, help me sell. And tell your friends. Because that's how theater succeeds in this town, is word of mouth. And I promise you, when you walk through my door, you can expect 2 hours, give or take, of light comedy or mystery presented with as much verve and gusto as I and my cast can muster. So if you like what you see, help me sell. Tell your friends. So, here we are, the second in our series of the Comedy Genius of Robert Benchley. Well, Robert Benchley, as a sample of this humor, was asked by Who's Who to submit a biography of himself. And this is what he submitted. Robert Charles Benchley, born Isle of Wight, September 15, 1807. Shipped as cabin boy on the Florence J. Marble, 1815. Arrested for bigamy and murder at Port Said, 1817. Released 1820. Wrote A Tale of Two Cities, married Princess Anastasia of Portugal, 1831. Children, Prince Rupert and several little girls. Wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, 1850. Editor of Godoy's Ladies' Book, 1851 to 1856. Began Les Miserables in 1870, finished by Victor Hugo. Died 1871, buried in Westminster Abbey. So, now we will start again to explore the humor of Robert Benchley. And, just like last time, I have the same crew here to help me. I have Tony Eckstaff. Oh, you don't know what that does to his ego, and I have to work with it. Drew Kallen. And Mel Summers. And now, the comedy genius, of Robert Benchley.
The time seemed to have come to send Junior away to boys' camp for the summer. He was getting too large to have about the house during the hot weather. Besides, getting him out of town seemed the only way to stop the radio concerts, which have been making a continuous charcoal of our home life ever since March. So I therefore got out the magazine and turned to the section of the advertising heading Summer Camps and Schools. Now, there was a staggering array. Judging from the photographs, the entire child population of the United States spent last summer in bathing suits or on horseback. The pictures of them were so generic and familiar looking that there was a great temptation to spend the evening scrutinizing them closely to see if you could pick out anyone you knew. My wife Doris said in her practical way,
"Come on, read some out loud."
All right. The Nuga-Wooga camps.
Oh.
Nuga-Wooga. The garden spot of the Macasset Mountains. Tumbling water, calling birds, light-hearted laughter, horseback rides along shady trails, lasting friendships. All of these are the heritage of happy days at Nuga-Wooga. I don't think much of the costumes they give the boys to wear at Nuga-Wooga. They look rather sissy to me.
That's because you're looking at the camp for girls, dear.
Yes. Hurriedly turning the page as I came to the camp for boys. Camp Wickomagasset for manly boys on the famous Lake Pogoniblik in the heart of the far-famed Wapohamak district. Campfire stories, military drill, mountain climbing, swimming, wading, hiking, log cabin, sailing. They say nothing about horseshoeing. You don't suppose they teach horseshoeing?
Well, that probably comes in the second year for the older boys. You know, I wouldn't want Junior to plunge right into horseshoeing his first season.
Yeah.
You know, we mustn't rush him.
Yeah. Camp Wadnet-Go Gallant on the shores of Crisco Bay, Maine. Well, facing that grandest of all oceans, the Atlantic. Located among the best farms where fresh and wholesome food can be had in abundance. Yes, but is it had, my dear? That's the question. And I don't like the looks of the boat in that picture. It's too full of boys. A possum mountain camp for boys, unusual sports and trips. Oh, possibly condor stalking. That would certainly be unusual. But dangerous. I hate to think of Junior crawling over the ledges stalking condors. And it says here that there are a dietitian and a camp mother as well.
Camp mother probably thinks she knows how to bring up children.
Just then, Junior came in to announce that he had signed up for a job over the summer working on the farm of Eddie Westover's uncle. So, in view of this added income, I felt that I could afford a little vacation myself. And I'm leaving July 1st for Camp Mio-Nogonet in the foothills of the Rokomokos, a paradise for manly men.
18 men play a game of baseball, and 18,000 watch them. And yet, those who play are the only ones who have any official direction as to the matter of rules and regulations. The 18,000 are allowed to run wild. They don't even have a Spalding's guide containing group photographs, model organizations of fans at Fall River, Mass, or the junior rooters of Lyons, Nebraska. Whatever course of behavior a fan follows at a game, he makes up for himself. Well, this, of course, is ridiculous. The first official set of rules for spectators at baseball games has been formulated and is herewith reproduced. You know, it's to be hoped that in the general cleanup which the game is undergoing, the grandstand and the bleachers will not resent a little dictation from the authorities. In the first place, there's the question of shouting encouragement, or otherwise, at the players. Now, there must be no more random screaming. It's of course understood that the players are entirely dependent upon the advice offered them from the stands for their actions in the game. How's a batter to know what to do if, for instance, here's a little man in the bleachers shouting,
"Ah, wait for him, Billy, wait for him!"
and another man in the south stand shouting,
"Take a crack at the first one, Billy!"
Well, what would you do? What would Lincoln have done? Now, the official advisors in the stands must work together. They must remember that as the batter advances towards the plate, he's listening to them to give him his instructions. And if he hears conflicting advice, there's no telling what he may do. He may even have to decide for himself. Therefore, before each player goes to bat, there should be a conference among the fans who have ideas on what his course of action should be. And as soon as a majority have come to a decision, the advice should be shouted to the player in unison under the direction of a cheerleader. If there are any dissenting opinions, they may be expressed in a minority report. Now, in the matter of hostile remarks addressed to an unpopular player on the visiting team, it would probably be better to leave the wording entirely to the individual fans. Well, each man has his own talents in this sort of thing, and should be allowed to develop them along natural lines. In such crises as these, in which it becomes necessary to rattle the opposing pitcher or prevent the visiting catcher from getting a difficult foul, all considerations of good sportsmanship should be discarded. As a matter of fact, it's doubtful if good sportsmanship should ever be allowed to interfere with the fans' participation in the contest. The game must be kept free from all softening influences. One of the chief duties of the fan is to engage in arguments with the man behind him. Now, this department of the game has been allowed to run down fearfully. A great many men go to a ball game today and never speak a word to anyone other than members of their own party, or an occasional word of cheer to a player. This is nothing short of craven. An ardent supporter of the home team should go to a game prepared to take offense, no matter what happens. He should be equipped with a stock of ready sallies which can be used regardless of what the argument's about or what's gone before in the exchange of words. Among the more popular nuggets of repartee, effective on all occasions, are the following.
Oh, is that so?
Oh, yeah. How do you get that way?
Oh, is that so?
So are you.
Oh, go have your hair, Bob.
Oh, is that so?
Well, what are you going to do about it?
Who says so?
Yeah, well, I'm Cincinnati.
Oh, is that so?
Any one of these, if hurled with sufficient venom, is good for 10 points. Now, it should always be borne in mind there's no danger of physical harm resulting from even the most ferocious-sounding argument. Statistics gathered by the War Department show that the percentage of actual blows struck in grandstand arguments is 1 in every 43 million. Now, for those fans who are occasionally obliged to take inexperienced lady friends to the game, a special set of rules has been drawn up. These include the compulsory purchase of tickets in what is called the explaining section. A block of seats set aside by management for the purpose. Now, the view of the diamond in this section isn't very good, but it doesn't matter because the men wouldn't see anything of the game anyway, and the women can see just enough to give them material for questions and to whet their curiosity. As everyone around you is answering questions and trying to explain scorekeeping, there's not the embarrassment which is usually attendant on being overheard by unattached fans in the vicinity. There's also not the distracting sound of breaking pencils and modified cursing to interfere with the unattached fans' enjoyment of the game. Now, absolutely no gentleman with uninformed ladies will be admitted to the main stand. In order to enforce this regulation, a short examination of the rudiments of the game will take place at the gate, in which ladies will be expected to answer briefly the following questions, and women examiners will be in attendance. Number 1, what is the game that's being played on the field? Number 2, how many games have you seen before? 3, what is A, a pitcher, B, a base, C, a bat? 4, what color uniform does the home team wear? 5, what is the name of the home team? 6, in the following sentence, cross out the incorrect statements, leaving the correct one. The catcher stands, A, directly behind the pitcher in the pitcher's box, B, at the gate taking tickets, C, behind the batter, or D, at the bottom of the main aisle selling ginger ale. 7, what again is the name of the game you expect to see played? 8, do you cry easily? 9, is there anything else you'd rather be doing this afternoon? 10, if so, please go do it. Now, it has been decided that the American baseball fan should have a distinctive dress. A choice has been made from among the more popular styles, and the following has been designated as regulation, embodying, as it does, the spirit and tone of the great national pastime. Straw hat, worn well back on the head. 1 cigar, unlighted, held between teeth. Coat held across knees, vest worn, but unbuttoned and open, displaying both belt and suspenders, with a gold watch chain connecting the bottom pockets. Now the vest may be an added expense to certain fans who do not wear vests during the summer months, but it's been decided that it's absolutely essential to the complete costume, and no true baseball enthusiast will hesitate in complying. The opening week of the baseball season brought out a few surprises. The lineup in the grandstands was practically the same as when the season closed last fall. Most of the fans busying themselves before the first game started by picking old 1921 seat checks and October peanut crumbs out of the pockets of their lightweight overcoats. Old-timers on the two teams recognized familiar faces in the bleachers and were quick to give them a welcoming cheer. The game, by innings, as was conducted by the spectators, is as follows. First inning, Scanlon, sitting in the first base bleachers, yelled,
Come on, Ruth, lead it off with a homer!
Thibbets sharpened his pencil. Liebman and O'Rourke in the south stand engaged in a bitter controversy over Peckinpah's last season batting average. No runs. Second inning, Scanlon yelled to Brody,
Hey, Brody, wing out a double!
Turtelot said that Brody couldn't do it. Scanlon said,
How is that so?
Turtelot said, Yeah, that's so, and what do you know about it? Brody winged out a double, and Scanlon's collar came undone, and he lost his derby. Stevens announced that this made Brody's batting average 1,000 for the season so far. Jocelyn laughed. Third inning, Thibbets sharpened his pencil. Zinser yelled to Mays to watch out for a fast one. Steinway yelled to Mays to watch out for a slow one. Mays failed. Scanlon called out and asked Brazil,
Hey, Brazil! How's all them little Brazil nuts?
Whitebait turned to Scanlon and said,
I'll Brazil, not you.
Scanlon said,
Oh yeah, when are you going to start doing it?
Whitebait,
Right now.
All right, come on, I'm waiting. Yeah?
Yeah.
Well, why don't you come, you haddock?
Well, I'll wait for you outside where there ain't no ladies.
no runs. Fourth inning, Scanlon called out to Ruth.
Hey, babe, knock out a homer!
Thibbets sharpened his pencil. Scanlon yelled,
Atta boy, babe, what I tell ya.
when Ruth got a single. Fifth inning, Mrs. Whitebait asked Mr. Whitebait.
How do you mark a home run on the scorecard?
Mr. Whitebait said,
Why do you have to know? The Holmes knocked a home run yet.
Babe Ruth ran home in the last inning.
Yeah, I know, but that wasn't a home run.
Just why wasn't it a home run? A man ran home, especially if it's Babe Ruth.
I'll tell you later. I want to watch the game. Oh, jeez.
Mr. Whitebait groaned and snatched the card away from her and marked a home run for Ruth in the fourth inning. Sixth inning, Thurston called out to Hasty not to let them fool him. Wicker said that where Hasty got fooled in the first place was when he let them tell him he could play baseball. Unknown Man said that he was too hasty and laughed very hard. Thurston said that Hasty was a better pitcher than Mays when he was in form. Unknown Man said, huh? And laughed very hard again. Wicker asked how many times in 7 years Hasty was in form, and Thurston replied, often enough for you. Unknown Man said that what Hasty needed was some hasty pudding, and laughed so hard that his friend had to take him out. Thibbets sharpened his pencil. Seventh inning, Libby called everybody up, as if he had just originated the idea, and seemed proudly pleased when everyone stood up. Tossick threw money to the boy for a bag of peanuts, who tossed the bag to Levy, who kept it. Tossick threw the boy to Levy. Scanlon yelled to Ruth,
Come on, babe, how about a homer?
Ruth knocked a single, and Scanlon yelled,
Attaboy, babe, attaboy, all the way around.
Mrs. Whitebait asked Mr. Whitebait,
Which are the Clevelands?
Look, honey, the Clevelands ain't playing today. Just New York and Philadelphia. The only two teams can play the game at the same time. All right. Maybe next year they'll have it so Cleveland and Philadelphia can both play New York at the same time. But they'll have to change the rules first. There, you happy?
Well, you don't have to be so nasty about it.
My God, who's being nasty?
Well, the only reason why I came up with you anyway was to see the Giants play, and because then I know you weren't off with a lot of bootleggers.
Well, you ain't watching the Giants, you're watching the Yankees. So where do you get that bootlegger stuff
Don't
from?
never mind where I got it.
no runs. Eighth inning, Thibbets sharpened his pencil. Licker got up and went home. Scanlon yelled to Ruth,
Hey, babe, end this game up with a homer.
Ruth singled. Scanlon yelled,
Attaboy, babe.
and went home. Ninth inning, Stevens began figuring up the players' batting averages for the season thus far. Wicker called over to Thurston and asked him how Mr. Hasty was now. Thurston said, That's all right how he is. Mrs. Whitebait said,
I intend to go to my sister for dinner. You can do what you like.
You can bet I'll do just that.
Thibbets broke his pencil. Score, New York 11, Philadelphia 1.
Measure Your Mind by M.R. Traub and Frank Parker Stockbridge is apt to be a very discouraging book if you have any doubt at all about your own mental capacities. From a hasty glance through the various tests, I figured out that I would be classified in Group B, indicating low average ability, reserved usually for those just learning the English language or preparing for a job holding a spike while another man hits it. If they ever adopt the Mentimeter tests on this journal, I shall have just about 45 minutes. The trouble is that each of these tests starts off so easily. You begin to think that you are so good that no one has ever even begun to appreciate you. There is, for instance, a series of 24 pictures. Very badly drawn. Thank you, Mr. Frank Parker Stockbridge. You think you're so smart, picking flaws with people's intelligence. If you could draw a better head than the one on page 131, I would throw up the whole business. At any rate, in each of one of these, there's a picture of something wrong, wholly apart from the drawing. You're supposed to pick up the incongruous feature, and you have 180 seconds in which to tear 24 pictures to pieces. The first one is easy. The rabbit has one human ear. In the second one woman has an eye in her hair. Pretty soft, you say to yourself. In the third, the bird has 3 legs. It looks like a cinch. Following in quick succession come a man with a mouth on his forehead, a horse with cow's horns, a mouse with rabbit ears, etc. You will have time for handsprings before the 180 seconds are up. But then they get tricky. There is a postcard with a stamp upside down. Well, what's wrong with that? Certainly that's no affront to nature in a stamp being upside down. Neither is there in a man looking through the large of a telescope if he wants to. You can't arbitrarily say at the top of the page, mark the thing that is wrong, and then have a picture with a house with one window larger than the others and expect one to agree with that's necessarily wrong. I mean, it may look queer, but so does the whole picture. I mean, you can't tell. The big window may open from a room that needs a big window. You know, I'm not going to stultify myself by making things wrong, which I know nothing about. The facts. Who am I that I should condemn a man for looking through the large end of a telescope? Personally, I like to look through the large end of a telescope. It only shows the state of personal liberties in this country when a picture of a man looking at a ship through the large end of a telescope is held before the young and branded as wrong. Arguing these points with yourself takes up quite a bit of time, and you get so out of patience with the man that made up the examination that you lose all heart in it. Then come some pictures which I frankly am really in the dark. There is a Ford car with a rather funny-looking mudguard, but who can pick out any one feature of a Ford and say that it's wrong? It may look wrong, but I'll bet that this car in this picture stands a chance of passing any big car on a hill. And then there's a boy holding a bat, and while exposition isn't all that the coach might ask for, the only radically thing wrong that I can detect from the picture is that he's evidently playing baseball in a clean white shirt with a necktie, and a rather natty cap set perfectly straight in his head. It is true that his right thumb laid along the edge of the bat might be a little strange, but maybe he likes to bunt that way. There's something in the picture that I don't get, I'm afraid. Just as there is a picture of 2 men playing golf. One is about to punt, aside from the fact that his putter seems just a little trifle long, and I shouldn't give up my guess and take my defeat like a man. But I do refuse to concede anything to picture number 22. Here a baby is shown sitting on the floor. He appears to be about a year and a half old. Incidentally, he's a very plain baby. Strewn about him on the floor are the toys that he's been playing with. There is a ball, a rattle, a ring, a doll, a bell, and a pair of roller skates. Evidently, the candidate is supposed to be aghast that the roller skates are in possession of such a small child. The man who drew this picture evidently never furnished playthings for a small child. I can imagine nothing that would delight a child of a year and a half more than a pair of roller skates to chew and spin and hit himself in the face with. They could also be dropped on Daddy when Daddy's lying on the floor in an attempt to be sociable. Of all the toys arranged before the child, the roller skates are the most logical. I suppose the author of this test would insist on calling a picture wrong which showed a baby with a safety razor or an overshoe on his head. And yet, A photograph of the public library could not be more true to life. That is my great trouble in taking tests and examinations of any kind. I always want to argue with the examiner, because the examiner is always so obviously wrong.
Some well-known saying, it doesn't make much difference what, is proved by the fact that everyone likes to talk about his experience at the dentist. Now, for years and years, little articles like this have been written on the subject. Little jokes like some that I shall presently make have been made, and people in general have been telling other people what emotions they experience when they crawl into the old red plush guillotine. They like to explain to each other how they feel when the dentist puts that buzzer thing against their bicuspids, and if sufficiently pressed, they will describe their sensations on mouthing rubber dam.
I'll tell you what I hate.
They will say with great relish.
When he takes that little nut pick and begins to scrape, ugh.
Hey, what about that time when he's got that probe and he hits a nerve? Oh, man.
And if there are more than 2 people at the experience meeting, everyone will chip in and tell you what he or she considers to be the worst phase of a dentist's work, all present enjoying the narration hugely, and not so more than the narrator, who has suffered so. Now, this sort of thing has been going on ever since the first mammoth gold tooth was hung out as bait to folks in search of a good time. By the way, when did the present obnoxious system of dentistry begin? And that can't be so very long ago that the electric auger was invented, and where would a dentist be without an electric auger? Yet you never hear of amalgam filling day, or any other anniversary of the dental year. There must be some conspiracy of silence on the part of the trade to keep hidden the names of the men who are responsible for all this. And however many years it has been that dentists have been plying their trade, and all that time, people are never tired of talking about their teeth. This is probably due to the inscrutable workings of nature, who is always supplying new teeth to talk about. Now, as a matter of fact, the actual time and suffering in the chair is only a fraction of the gross expenditure connected with the affair. The preliminary period, about which nobody talks, is much the worst. This dates from the discovery of the Weber tooth, and extends to the moment when the dentist places his foot on the automatic hoist, which jacks you up into rage. Giving gas for tooth extraction is very humane in its way, but the time for anesthetics was when the patient first decides that he must go to the dentist. From then on, until the first excavation is started, should be shrouded in oblivion. Now, there's probably no more moment more appalling than in which the tongue, running idly over the teeth in a moment of carefree play, comes suddenly upon the ragged edge of a space, in which the old familiar filling has disappeared. The world stops and you look meditatively up at the corner of the ceiling. Quickly you draw your tongue away and try to laugh the whole affair off, saying to yourself, stuff and nonsense, old fellow. Nothing the matter with your tooth. Your nurse is just upset after a hard day's work, that's all. Having decided this to your satisfaction, you slyly, and with a poor attempt at being casual, slide the tongue back along the timeline of adjacent teeth, hoping against hope that it will reach the end without mishap. There it is. There can be no doubt about it this time. The tooth has simply got to be filled by someone, and the only person who can fill it with anything permanent is a dentist. You wonder if you might not be able to patch it up yourself for the time being. A year or so. Perhaps a little spruce gum and coating the new skin. It's fairly far back. It wouldn't have to be a very sightly job. This has an impractical sound even to you. I mean, you might want to eat some peanut brittle. You never can tell when somebody might offer you peanut brittle these days. And with new skin, while serviceable enough in the case of cream soups and custard, I can't be expected to stand up under heavy crunching. So you admit that since the thing has got to be filled, it might as well be a dentist who does the job. That much decided that all that is necessary is to call him up and make an appointment. So let us say that this resolve is made on Tuesday. That afternoon, you start to look up the dentist number in the telephone book. And it's a great wave of relief sweeps over you when you discover it isn't there. How can you be expected to make an appointment with a man who hasn't got a telephone? How can you have a tooth filled without making an appointment? The whole thing is impossible, and that's all there is to it. God knows you did your best. And on Wednesday, there's a slightly more insistent twinge owing to the bad management of a sip of ice water. You decide you simply must get in touch with the dentist when you get back from lunch. But you know how these things are. I mean, first one thing and then another comes up, and the man came in from Providence who had to be shown around the office, and by the time you had a minute to yourself, it was 5 o'clock. And anyway, the tooth didn't bother you again. You wouldn't be surprised if by being careful, you could get along with it as far as to the end of the week. You have more time. Man has to think of business, after all, and what's a little personal discomfort in the shape of an unfilled tooth and the satisfaction of a work well done at the office. Eh? So by Saturday morning, you're fairly reconciled with going ahead, but you know, it's really only a half day, and he has no appointments left anymore. Monday is really the time. You can begin the week afresh. After all, Monday is really the logical day to start in and going into the dentist. So bright early Monday morning, you make another try at the telephone book and find, to your horror, that sometime between now and last Tuesday, the dentist's name and number have been inserted into the directory. There it is. There's no getting around it. Burgess, Jasper Kendall, DDS, Cortland 2654. There's nothing left to do but call them up. Unfortunately, the line is busy, which gives you a perfectly good excuse for putting it over until Tuesday. But on Tuesday, luck is against you, and you get a clear connection with the doctor's. Appointment is arranged for Thursday afternoon at 3:30. Thursday afternoon. Here it is, only Tuesday morning. Almost anything could happen between now and then. We might declare war on Mexico. And off you have to go. Dentist appointment and no dentist appointment. I mean, surely a man couldn't let a date to have a tooth filled stand in the way of his duty to his country. Or the social revolution might start on Wednesday, and by Thursday, the whole town might be in ashes. You can picture yourself standing Thursday afternoon at 3:30 on the ruins of City Hall, fighting off marauding bands of Reds, and saying to yourself with a sigh of relief, only to think, this time I was to have been climbing into a dentist chair. Never can tell when your luck might turn into a thing like that. Then Wednesday goes by and nothing happens. And Thursday morning dawns without even a word of the dentist saying that he's been called suddenly out of town to lecture before the Insiders Club. Apparently everything is working against you. By this time your tongue has taken up a permanent resting place, and your vacant tooth is causing you to talk indistinctly and incoherently. Somehow you feel that if the dentist opens your mouth and finds the tip of your tongue in the tooth, he will be deceived and go away without doing anything. The only thing left is for you to call him up and say that you have just killed the man and being arrested and can't possibly make it. But you know, any dentist would see through that. He'd laugh right through his transmitter at you. There's probably no excuse which would be possible to invent, which a dentist has not heard 80 or 90 times. Now, you might as well see this thing through now. Luncheon. It's a ghastly right. The whole left side of your jaw has suddenly developed an acute sensitiveness, and the disaffection has spread to the 4 teeth on either side of the original one. You doubt that it will be possible for him to touch it at all. Perhaps all he does intend to do is look at it this time anyway. You might suggest that to him. You could very easily come in again soon and have him do the actual work. 3:30 draws near. It's a horrible time of day at best. I mean, just when a man's vitality is the lowest. Before stepping in and out of the sunlight into the building which the dentist parlor is, you can take one look around at the happy people scurrying by in the street. Carefree children that they are. What do they know about life? Probably that man in the silly-looking hat has never had trouble so much with his baby teeth. There they go, pushing and jostling each other as if within 10 feet of them there was not a man who stands on the brink of the great misadventure. Oh well, life is like that. Into the elevator. The last hope is gone. The door clangs. You look hopelessly around with the stupid faces of your fellow passengers. How can people be so clownish? Of course, there's always the chance that the elevator will fall and you will be terribly hurt. Now, that's too much to expect. You dismiss it from your thoughts. It's too impractical, too visionary. Things don't work out as happily as that in real life. You do feel a certain glow of heroic pride when you tell the operator the right floor number. You might have just as easily told them the floor too high or too low, and that would at least have caused delay. But after all, a man must prove himself a man, and the least you can do is meet fate with an unflinching eye and give the right floor number. Now, too often has the scene in the dentist's waiting room been described for me to try to do it again here. They're all alike. The antiseptic smell, the ominous hum from the operating rooms, the 1921 literary digest, and the silent, sullen group of waiting patients, each trying to look unconcerned and cordially disliking everyone else in the room. All of these have been sung by poets with far greater lyric powers than mine. Not that I really think that they are greater than mine, but that's the customary form of excuse for not writing something and haven't got time or space to do it. As a matter of fact, I think I could do it much better than has ever been done before. Anyway, I can only say that as you sit looking with unseeing eyes for a large book entitled The Great War in Pictures, you would gladly change places with the most lowly of God's creatures. It is inconceivable that there should be anyone worse off with you, unless perhaps it was some of the poor wretches who are waiting with you. Now that one over there in the armchair, nervously tearing to shreds a copy of the Dental Review and Practical Inlay Worker. She may have something frightful the trouble with her. She can't possibly look more worried. Perhaps it is very, very painful. The thought cheers you up considerably. What cowards women are at times like these. And then comes the sound of voices from the next room.
All right, doctor, if it gives me any more pain, shall I call you up? Do you think it'll bleed much more? Oh, Saturday morning then, at 11. Oh, goodbye, doctor.
And a middle-aged man emerges. All men are middle-aged when emerging from a dentist's office. Looking as if he were playing the big emotional scene in John Ferguson. A wisp of hair waves dissolutely across his forehead between his eyes. His face is pale, except for a slight inflammation of the corners of his mouth, and in his eyes is that faraway look of one who's been face to face with life. If he's through, he should care how he looks. And the nurse appears and looks inquiring at each one in the room. Each one in the room evades the nurse's glance in one last futile attempt to fool someone and get away without seeing the dentist. Then she spots you. Nods pleasantly. God, how pleasantly she nods. And they law against people being as pleasant as that.
The doctor will see you now.
English language may hold a more disagreeable combination of words than.
The doctor will see you now.
I am willing to concede something to the phrase.
Have you anything more to say before the current is turned on?
That may be worse for the moment, if it doesn't last so long. For continued, unmitigated depression, I know nothing to equal.
The doctor will see you now.
But I am not narrow-minded about it. I am willing to consider other possibilities. Smiling feebly, you trip over the extended feet of the man next to you, and you stagger into the delivery room where, amidst the ghastly array of death masks and teeth and blue flames waving eerily from the Bunsen burners and the drowning sound of perpetually running water which chokes and gurgles at intervals. Sink into the chair and close your eyes. But now, let us consider the spiritual exaltation that comes when you are at last let down and turned loose. It is all over. And what did it amount to? Nothing at all. Nothing at all. Oh, you suddenly develop a particular friendship for the dentist. A splendid fellow, really. You ask him questions about his instruments. What was he use that thing for instance? Oh, to think of a little thing like that, making all that trouble. The dentist family, how are they? Oh, that's fine. That's fine. And you shake hands with them, and you straighten your tie. Forgotten is the fact that you have another appointment for Monday. There's no such thing as Monday. You're through for today. And all is right with the world. As you pass out of the waiting room, you leer at the others unpleasantly. Yeah. Poor officials. Why can't they take their medicine like grown people, not sit there moping as if they're going to be shot? I hope there's the elevator man, a charming fellow. You wonder if he knows that you just had a tooth filled. You feel tempted to tell him. Slap him on the back. You feel tempted to tell everyone out in the bright, cheery street. And what a wonderful street it is, too. All full of nice black snow and water. After all, life is sweet. And then you go and you find the first person who you can accost without being arrested, and you explain to him what it is that the dentist did to you and how you felt and what you've got to have done next time. Which brings us right back to where we were in the beginning, and perhaps accounts for everyone liking to divulge their dental secrets to others. It may be a sort of hysterical relief that, for the time being, it's all over with.
just finished reading an article by an expert in auction bridge, and it has left me in a cold sweat. As near as I can make out, it presupposes that everyone who plays bridge knows what he's going to do before he does it. Which simply means that I've been going along all this time working on exactly the wrong theory. It may incidentally explain why I've never been voted the most popular bridge player at Wimblehurst, or presented with the loving cup by admiring members in the neighborhood club. Diametrically opposed to the think before you play advocated by this expert, my game has been built up purely on intuition. I rely almost entirely on the inner promptings of the moment in playing a card. I don't claim that there's anything spiritualistic about it, for it does not work out with consistent enough success to be in any way uncanny. As a matter of fact, it causes me a lot of trouble. When one relies on instinct to remind one of what trumps are, or how many of them have been played, and there's bound to be a slip-up every so often. But what chagrins me after reading this expert's article is the thought that all this while I may have been playing with people who were actually thinking the thing out beforehand, in a sordid sort of way, counting the trumps, figuring out who had the queen and where the 10th spot lay. I didn't think there were such people like that in the world. Here I've been going ahead in an honest, hail-fellow, well-met mood, sometimes following suit, sometimes trumping my partner's trick, always taking it for granted that the idea was to get the hand played as quickly as possible in order to talk it over and tell each other how it might have been done differently. It is true that now and again I've noticed some sharp looks directed at me by my various partners. But I've usually attributed to a little mannerism I have of humming softly while I play. And I've always stopped humming whenever my partner showed signs of displeasure, being perfectly willing to meet one halfway in an effort to make the evening pleasant for everyone. But now I'm afraid that perhaps the humming was only a minor offense. I'm appalled at the thought of what really was the trouble. I should never have been allowed myself to be dragged into it at all. My first big mistake came when, in a moment of weakness, I consented to learn the game. For a man who can frankly say,
Oh, I do not play bridge.
is allowed to go over in the corner and play the pianola by himself. While the poor neophyte, no matter how much he may protest that he isn't,
Not at all a good player. In fact, I'm perfectly rotten.
is never believed, but dragged into a game where it is discovered too late that he spoke the truth. But it was a family affair at first. Dora belonged to a whist club which met every Friday afternoon on strictly partisan lines, except for once a year when they asked the men in. My experience with this organization had been necessarily limited, as it held its sessions during my working hours. Once in a while, however, I would get home in time to meet in the front hall the stragglers who were just leaving, amid general searching for furs and overshoes, and for some unaccountable reason, I usually felt very foolish on such occasions. Certainly I had a right, under common law, to be coming home in my own front door, but I always felt a sneaking feeling there in the midst of the departing guest that the laugh was on me. One Friday, when I was confined to my room with a touch of neuralgia, it was on the right side of my face. It was totally blown up. I'd love to tell you more about it sometime. I could hear the sounds of carnival going on downstairs. The noises made by women playing bridge are distinctive. At first, the listener is aware of a sort of preliminary conversational murmur with a running accompaniment of shuffling pasteboards. Then follows an unnatural quiet, punctuated by the thud of jeweled knuckles or the clank of bracelets on the baize, with now and then little squeals of dismay or delight from some of the more demonstrative, and occasionally,
Good for you, partner!
from an appreciative dummy. Gradually, as the hand drawn toward its close, there begins a low sound, like the murmurings of a stage mob in wings, which rapidly increases until the room is filled with a shrill chatter, resembling that of a birdhouse in Central Park, for which there are distinguishable merely as a wild medley.
If you'd let me with your
I'm
keys,
so afraid that she might trump in.
Oh my dear, I didn't have a face card.
you're way just the wrong.
I have the jack of 10 and 9 and 7.
Oh, yes, I became.
Ace and 3 little ones.
How about all of them?
Oh my dear, sin. If I
If you'd return my lead, my dear.
This listening in at bridge was the nearest I'd ever been to the front. Until it came time for Friday afternoon club to let the bars down and have a men's night. I had no illusions about this men's night, but it was a case of learning to play bridge and accompanying Dora, or of her getting some man from off the sidewalk to take my place. I figured it would cause less talk if I were to play myself. As I think it over now, I feel that the strange man scheme might have worked out with less comment being made than my plan. But it was for this purpose I allowed myself to be instructed in the rudiments of bridge. I had nothing permanent in mind in absorbing these principles, fully expecting to forget them again the day after the party. I miscalculated by about 1 day, now it seems. Now, the expert whose article has been such an inspiration to me had some neat little diagrams drawn for him showing just where the cards lay in the 4 hands, with the people indicated as A, B, Y, and Z. Apparently the same people in the world who in our algebras some years ago used to buy and sell apples to each other with feverish commercialism and to run races with all sorts of ridiculous handicaps. What a small world it is, after all. It seems to me, therefore, that since this is a pretty fairly technical article, it might as well be were I to utilize the same diagrammic device and terse method of description to show the exact course of the first hand in which I participated in the party. Now, A and B are our opponents. X and I, oddly enough, is myself. Now, A is Ralph Tibbetts, one of those cool devils who thinks he knows all about a game and usually does. He has an irritating way of laying down his cards when the hand is about half played and saying,
Well, the rest is mine.
and the most irritating part of all is that when you've insisted on figuring it out for yourself, he's found to be right. I disliked him at first. B is Mr. Lucas, who breathes hard and says nothing, but clanks his cards down with finality, seeming to say,
That for you.
he got nervous. X, my partner, used to be a good friend of mine. And so far as I'm concerned, I would be perfectly willing to let bygones be bygones and be on friendly terms again. Now, in utilizing the expert's method of description, I shall improve upon it slightly by also indicating the conversation accompanying each play, a feature of which is considerable importance in the game. Now, B deals and makes it 3 diamonds. After X has tried to bid hearts without encouragement from me, I pass as a matter of principle, not being at all sure of the bidding proposition. I lead with a clear field and no particular object in view, the 8 of diamonds. It looks as uncompromising as any card in my hand.
Leading trumps.
Says X with a raising of the eyebrows. What do you know about that? I'd forgotten they were trumps. I must be asleep. Like the old Irishman when St. Peter asked him where he came from. And he said, Begorra. A cuts this story short by playing the 3 of diamonds. X, with some asperity, discards the 3 of spades, and B takes the trick with a 10 spot. Silence. Now, the story of the Irishman at St. Peter, I continue, was told to me by a fellow in Buffalo last week who'd just come from France. He said that while he was in a place called Mousson or Moussaing, he actually saw...
Your play.
Beg your pardon. I say, whose jack of spades is that?
Mine.
Says B, drumming on the table with his fingernails and looking about the room at pictures. Having more poor diamonds than anything else in my hand and aiming to get them out of the way so it's impossible to give the good cards a chance, I play the 5 of diamonds.
What? Trumping it? How do you know spades?
I can see that I've got you read. And though, as a matter of fact, I've got plenty of spades, I smile knowingly and sit tight. These smart Alecs make me sick. Telling me what I should play, when I should play it. A accepts the inevitable and plays his 2 spot. X considerably cheers up, plays the 4, and says,
Our trick partner.
I pick up the cards and mix them with those already in my hand, reverting for a time to poker tactics. This error, alone among all that I make there in the game, is unobserved. Well, I suppose you people are all excited about the new baby up at your house, I say pleasantly to A, just to show that I can be gracious at victory as well as at defeat. Let's see, is it a boy or a girl?
It's your lead.
Beg your pardon. I said, I certainly am asleep tonight, and as my thumb is on the 5 of diamonds, I lead it.
Here, here. Wasn't that the 5 of diamonds that you trumped with just a minute ago?
That man has second sight. As a matter of fact, I suspect there's something crooked about him,
Yes, it is.
says B, who made his longest speech of the evening. X says,
Where is the trick we took?
then it's discovered that it found its way into my hand, from which it is disentangled with considerable trouble and segregated. As for me, I pass the whole thing off as a joke. I sold the paper this morning, I began, when the situation became a little less complicated, where a woman in Perth Amboy found $100 in the lining of an old lounge.
It's your lead, if you don't mind. You have made only 1 false start, a possible 3. Try again.
I pretend not to hear this sarcasm. And just to show that there's life left in the old dog yet, I lead the ace of spades.
Look here, my dear sir. Only 1 hand ago you refused spades and trumped them. That revoked in your part gives us 3 tricks and we throw up the hand.
Fair enough, I retorted cheerfully. 3 is just what you mean, isn't it? Quite a coincidence, I call it. And with that, I throw my cards on the table with considerable relief. Nothing good could have come from this hand, even if we played it until midnight. Now, from all sides arose those familiar sounds of the post-mortem.
I had the jack, 10-9, all good, but I just couldn't get in with them.
If you'd only let me lead with your king, we could have sent them at least 2.
Well, I knew that Grace had a king, but I didn't dare try to finesse.
We had simple honor.
As soon as I saw you leading spades, I knew that there was nothing in it.
But at our table, there was no post-mortem. Not because there had been no death, but there seemed nothing to say about it. So we sat marking down our scores until Dora came up behind me and said, well, dear, how is your game coming on? And as no one else seemed to speak, I said, oh, finally, I'm getting the hang of it in no time. My partner muttered something about hanging being too good, which seemed a bit uncalled for. And so I went through the evening, meeting new people and making new friends. And owing to Doris having neglected to teach me the details of scorekeeping, I had to make up a system for myself. With the result that I finished the evening with a total of 15,000 points and won the first prize. Beginner's luck, I called it, with modest good nature. 50-minute intermission, and we'll be back to Benchley. What we're going to do here from now, oh boy, I don't know, until Christmas. But I want to talk about the next two things coming in here. Opening up weeks, the last Friday in July, we're going to have the next come in. It'll be an evening of plays, a collection of plays by A.A. Milne, the author of Winnie the Pooh. Now, we did a play of his last year called The Dover Road, and the audience enjoyed it so much, and the cast enjoyed performing it so much, I decided to bring him back again. But this time I brought back 3 of his one-act plays. Now, these are for adults. They're not adult plays, but they're for adults. But they're just as charming as Winnie the Pooh was. They're full of surprises. I guarantee you will not be able to guess how any of them works out. And it'll start the last weekend of July and play through the month of August. Now, the first 2 weekends of September, we're going to have our 3rd Comedy Genius presentation. It'll be the Comedy Genius of O. Henry. Now, I don't know when was the last time you picked up O. Henry, but I could put, and probably will do, 6 shows. His work is just wonderful. Besides the surprise ending, which he's noted for, his narration is just so witty. His stories are just a pleasure to listen to. And they're, again, talk about surprises, O. Henry was noted for his surprises. So those will be the first 2 weekends in September. So that's what's coming up next, an evening of 3 one-act plays by A.A. Milne and the Comedy Genius of O. Henry. So, let's get back to it with Drew and Tony and Nell, and let's finish up the Comedy Genius of Robert Benchley.
In a recent book entitled The Psychic Life of Insects, Professor Bouvier says we must be careful not to credit the little winged fellows with intelligence when they behave in what seems like an intelligent manner. They may only be reacting. I would like to confront the professor with an instance of reasoning power on the part of an insect, which cannot be explained away in any such manner. During the summer of 1899, while I was at work on my treatise, Do Love a Laugh, we kept a female wasp at our cottage in the Adirondacks. It really was more like a child of our own than a wasp, except that it looked more like a wasp than a child of our own. That was the one way that we could tell the difference. It was still a young wasp when we got it, 13 or 14 years old. And for some time, we could not get it to eat or drink. It was so shy. Since it was a female, we decided to call it Miriam. Oh, but soon the child's nickname for it, Pudge, became a fixture, and Pudge it was from that time on. One evening, while I'd been working late in my laboratory fooling around with some gin and other chemicals, and in leaving the room, I tripped over a 9 of diamonds which someone had left lying on the floor, and I knocked over my entire card catalog containing the names and addresses of all the larvae worth knowing in North America. The cards went everywhere. I was too tired to stop and pick them up that night and went sobbing to bed, just as mad as I could be. But as I went, however, I noticed the wasp flying about in circles over the scattered cards. Maybe Pudge will pick them up, I said, half laughing to myself, never thinking for one moment that such a thing would be the case. When I came down the next morning, Pudge was still asleep in her box, evidently tired out. And when she might have been, because, for there on the floor lay the cards scattered about just as I'd left them the night before. The faithful little insect had buzzed about them all night, trying to come up with some decision about picking them up and arranging them in the catalog box, and then figuring out for herself that she knew practically nothing about lava of any sort, except for wasp lava. She would probably just make more of a mess of rearranging them than if she just left them on the floor for me to fix. It was too much for her to tackle, and discouraged she went over and lay down in her box, where she cried herself to sleep. If this is not an answer to Professor Bouvier's statement that insects have no reasoning power, I don't know what is.
Personally, I class roast beef with watercress and vanilla cornstarch pudding as tasty articles of diet. It undoubtedly has more than the required number of calories, leans over backwards in its eagerness to stand high among our best proteins, and according to a vivid chart in the back of the cookbook, is equal in food value to 3 dried raisins stacked one on the other, plus peanut butter the size of an egg. But for all that, I can't seem to feel I'm having a good time while I'm eating. It stimulates the same nerve centers in me as a lantern slide lecture on Palestine, the old and new. However, I have noticed there are people who are not bored by it. In fact, I've seen them deliberately order it in a restaurant when they had the choice of something else. So I thought the only fair thing I could do would be to look into the matter. See if in this great city there weren't some different ways of serving roast beef to vary its monotony. Roast beef is not the same price in all eating places. What makes the difference? What does a diner at the Ritz get in his roast prime ribs of beef au jus that makes it distinctive from the special today roast beef and mashed potatoes at the Bowery restaurant? To answer these questions, I started out on a tour of the representative eating places of some of our best-known strata of society. Whatever my conclusions are, you may be sure that they are thoroughly inexpert. First, I tried out what's known as the Bay State Lunch, so-called because on Thursdays they have a fish cake special. It's in one of the hundreds of self-serving luncheons where you approach the marble counter and you give your order in a low tone to a man in a barber's coat, and then repeat it in intervals of 1 minute, each time louder and each time to a different man, until you're forced to point to a tub of salmon and say, "Some of that!" For which your ticket's punched and you're allowed to take your portion and nurse it over on the overdeveloped arm of the chair. Here, the roast beef is shot through the Punch and Judy arrangement in the wall. A piece of meat about as large round as a man-sized mitten, steeping in its own gravy and of a pale reddish hue. Price was 20 cents, which included a dab of mashed potato dished out in an ice cream scoop, a generous allowance of tender peas, 2 hot tea biscuits, and butter to match. Considering the basic ingredient, it was a perfectly satisfactory meal. I felt 20 cents was little enough to pay for it, especially since it was going on my expense account. For the next experiment, I went to a restaurant where businessmen are wont to gather for luncheon, men who pride themselves on their acumen and adherence to principles of efficiency. The place has a French name, and its menus are printed on a card the size of a life insurance company's complimentary calendar, always an ominous sign. The roast beef here was served cold, with a plate of escarole salad. When I was a boy, I used to have to dig escarole out of the front lawn with a trowel so the grass could have a chance. For 75 cents. The meat bulked a little larger than at the Bay State Lunch, but when the fat had been cut away and trimmed off, the salvage about the size of a boy's mitt. And as for taste, the only difference I could detect was that one had been hot, the other cold. Oh, and incidentally, the waiter had some bosom friends in the next room who fascinated him, so it was all I could do to make him see that if he didn't come around to me just once in a while, just as a matter of form, there'd be no way for me to tip him. Beef and salad plus tip, 90 cents. Well, that evening I ambled up the Bowery until I came to the Busy Home restaurant. On a blackboard in front was written, roast beef, mashed potatoes, and coffee, 10 cents. Now my old hunger again seized me, and I said to myself, look here, be a man. This thing's getting the best of you. Before I knew it, I was inside, seated at an oilcloth-covered table, saying in a hoarse voice, roast beef. The waiter was dressed in an informal costume, shirt sleeves rolled up, a mulatto apron around his waist, but he smiled genially when he took my order and was back in 2 minutes. The article itself was of regulation size, cut somewhat thinner perhaps, and bordering on the gray hue, but undoubtedly roast beef. It too had an affinity for its own gravy and hid itself modestly under an avalanche of mashed potatoes. A cup of coffee was also included in the 10 cents expense, although I wasn't coffee thirsty that night, so I didn't sample it. But I did help myself to the plate piled high with fresh bread, which was left in front of me, and all in all, it's what I should call a representative roast beef dinner. And I got more than 10 cents worth of calories, I know. Yeah, but so far, I'd kept below the 14th Street belt in my investigations. Roast beef is a cosmopolitan habit and knows no arbitrary boundaries. So I went uptown into one of the larger of our largest hotels. Not so near Grand Central Station as to be in the train shed, but not so far removed from it as to be represented by a different assembly. Here, I felt, would be the test. Could roast beef come back? Surrounded by glittering chandeliers and rich tapestries, snowy table linen and silver service. Here was the chance for ordinary roast beef to become a veritable dainty with some character, some distinctive touch that should lift it above all that roast beef has ever meant before. I entered the dining room in high hopes. Clad in a walking suit of virile tweed, I considered myself respectably dressed. Not ostentatiously respectable, I knew, but since most of the other diners were in evening dress, rather distingué, I thought. But apparently, the hotel retainers weren't trained to look through a rough exterior and find the sterling qualities beneath. They looked through my rough exterior, all right, but they didn't stop at my sterling qualities. They looked right through me to the man behind me and gave him the signal there was a seat for him. Not to be outdone, however, I got my place in the sun by cleverly tripping my rival as he passed me. So he fell into the fountain arrangement, while I sat down in the seat pulled out for him by the headway. Once I was in, nothing for them to do but let me stay. Well, after I'd been there a few minutes, a waiter came and put on a fresh tablecloth. 5 minutes later, another man placed a knife and spoon in my plate. Later in the evening, a boy with a basket of rolls wandered by, deposited one on my table with a pair of pinches. Personally, I was rather glad it was working out this way, for it made my story all the better, but I might have really been in a hurry for my dinner. Well, it wasn't long, as the crow flies, before one of the third assistant waiters unloosened enough to drop round and see if there was anything else I wanted, besides one roll and a knife and spoon. I looked over the menu as if I were in a pretty captious mood, and then, with the air of an epicure who has tasted to the dregs all the condiments of Arabia, whose jaded palate just refuses to thrill any longer, I ordered roast beef. Well, it was billed as 80 cents, which didn't strike me as being very steep, considering the overhead expense there must be in keeping little knots of waiters and busboys standing around doing nothing in the furthest corner of the room. The waiter wasn't very enthusiastic over my order. Something saved me from asking him if they threw in a side of mashed potatoes with the meat. He seemed to expect something more, even after I ordered potatoes, so I suggested an artichoke. Well, that cheered him up more than anything I'd done that evening. He really got quite fratty and said, "A little salad, sir?" Again, I imitated a man who had more experience with salads than any other three men put together and who's found them miserable sham. No, that will be all for now, I said, and turned wearily away. I wanted to tell him I had a dinner coat at home that looked enough sight better than his, but no use making a scene when it could be avoided. During the next 20 minutes, the orchestra played once. I ate my roll. Then the roast beef came on a silver platter with a silver cover. It was placed before me under the best possible scenic conditions. But the thing that met my gaze when the cover was lifted might just as well have been the same property piece of roast beef keeping company with a dab of mashed potatoes at the Bay State lunch. And a trifle more fat, was a shade pinker, and perhaps a micrometer could have detected a bit more bulk. But so far as I was concerned, or so far as the calories were concerned, it was the same. Now, I won't say that it was the same as the roast beef special at the Bowery restaurant, because the service at the Bowery restaurant was infinitely better. As a fitting garniture to such a dish, there was a corsage of watercress draped on the corner of the salad. Well, at any rate, it could be said for it was not intoxicating, so it could never cause any real misery in the world. I nibbled at my roast beef, but my spirit was broken. I'd gone through a week of self-denial, ordering roast beef when I craved edibles, eating at restaurants while my family waited for me at home. And here was the result of my researches. Roast beef is roast beef, and nothing can prevent it. From the 10-cent order of the busy home restaurant up through the piece I was just then eating, it was the same grim reality. The only justification for a difference in price being a silver salver or a waiter in tuxedo. But I said to myself, 80 cents isn't so much. That I've heard the orchestra play one tune every half hour, and had a kind word from one of the charge d'affaires of the waiter's staff. Well, this quite reconciled me until the check was brought. There, added to the initial expense of 80 cents, was the upkeep, such as cover, 25 cents, potatoes, 30 cents, and to this must be added the modest fee of 20 cents to the waiter and 10 cents to the hat boy who gave me the wrong hat. Total expense for one piece of roast beef, $1.70. Now, these investigations may not prove to be much of a contribution to the modern science of economics. I doubt if they're ever incorporated into any textbook, even if it should be a textbook on this very subject. But I must take credit to myself for one thing. Not once throughout the whole report have I alluded to the Tenderloin District.
Either more men are marrying more wives than ever before, or they're getting careless about it. During the past week, bigamy has crowded baseball out of the papers, and while this may be due in part to the fact that there was a cold, rainy week and little baseball could be played, yet there is a tendency to be noted there somewhere. All those wishing to note a tendency will continue on to the next paragraph. There is, of course, nothing new in bigamy. Anyone who goes in for it with the idea of originating a new fad, which shall be known by his name, like the daguerreotype or the Potatoes O'Brien, will have to reckon with the priority claims of several hundred generations of historical characters, most of which wearing brown beards. Just why beards and bigamy seem to have gone hand in hand through the ages is a matter for professional humorists to determine. We certainly haven't got the time to do it here. But the multiple marriages unearthed during the past week have a certain homey flavor, lacking in some of those who have gone before. For instance, the man in New Jersey, who had two wives living right with him all the time in the same apartment. No need for subterfuge there, no deceiving one about the other. Just a matter of walking back and forth between the dining room and the study. This is, of course, bigamy under ideal conditions. But in tracing a tendency like this, we must not deal so much with concrete cases, but with drifts and curves. A couple of statistics are also necessary, especially if it is an alarming tendency that is being traced. The statistics follow in alphabetical order. In the United States, during the years 1918 and 1919, there were 4,956,673 weddings. 2,485,845 of those were church weddings, strongly against the wishes of the bridegrooms concerned. In those weddings, 10,489,392 silver olive forks were received as gifts. Starting with these figures as a basis, we turn to the report of the Pennsylvania State Committee on Outdoor Gymnastics for the year beginning January 4th, 1920, and ending a year later. This report being fairly uninteresting, we leave it. We turn to another report which covers the manufacture and sale of rugs. There is a picture of a rug on it, and a darn good likeness it is too. Now, in this rug report, we find that it takes a Navajo Indian only 11 days to weave a rug 12 feet by 5 feet with a nice design in the middle. 11 days. Seems incredible. It only takes 365 days to make a year. Now, having seen that there are 73,000 men and women in this country today who can neither read nor write, and that of these only 4% or a little over half are colorblind, what do we conclude? What is to be the effect on our national morale? Who is to pay for this gigantic bill for naval armament? Before answering these questions any further than this, let us quote from an authority on the subject, a man who has given the best years, or at any rate some of the very good years of his life to research in this field, and who now takes exactly the stand which we have been outlining in this article. I would not, he says in a speech delivered before the Girls' Friendly Society of Laurel Hill, I would not for 1 minute detract from the glory of those who have brought this country to its present state of financial prominence among the nations of the world, and yet, as I think back on those dark days, I am impelled to voice the protest of millions of American citizens yet unborn. Now, perhaps some of our little listeners remember what the major premise of this article was. If so, you please communicate with the speaker. Oh yes, bigamy. It is certainly funny how many cases of bigamy you hear about nowadays. Either more men are marrying more wives than ever before. They're getting careless about it. You know, this sounds very, very familiar. It is barely possible that it is the sentence which this lecture opens. We say so many things in the course of one lecture. The repetition is most likely to creep in. At any rate, the tendency seems to be towards an increase in bigamy.
Now, by way of egging people on to buy Dr. Eliot's 5-foot shelf of books, the publishers are resorting to an advertisement in which are depicted two married couples. One reading together by the library table. The other playing some two-handed game of cards which is evidently boring them. The query is, which one of these couples will be happier in 5 years? The implication being the young couple who buy Dr. Eliot's books will, by constant reading aloud to each other from the works of the world's best writers, cement the relationship, which will put to shame the illiterate union of the young card players. Granted that most two-handed games of cards are dull enough to result in divorce at the end of 5 years, they cannot be compared to the cooperative family reading as a system of programming. If this were a betting periodical, we would have $10 to place on the chance of the following being the condition of affairs in the literary family at the end of the stated time. Now, the husband is reading his evening newspaper. The wife appears bringing a volume from the 5-foot shelf. Tonight, it is Darwin's Origin of the Species.
Hurry up and finish that paper. We'll never get along with this Darwin if we don't begin earlier than we did last night.
Well, suppose we didn't get along with it. That would suit me fine.
Don't want me to read it, just say so. If it is too far over your head, just say so.
It's not over my head. It's just dull. Why don't you read some more out of that Italian novel?
Ugh, I hate that. I suppose you'd rather have me read The Sheik.
No, I wouldn't rather have you read The Sheik. Go on with Darwin, I'm listening.
You go with Darwin, my Darwin. You know, I simply want to know a little bit more, that's all. Of course, you know everything, so you don't have to read anything.
Go on!
The last book you read was so far over your head.
Go on!
Reads in an injured tone 1.5 pages on the selective process of pigeons. You're asleep!
I am not! The last words you read were to this conclusion.
Ah, yes. Well, what were the words before that?
How should I know? I'm not learning this thing to recite it somewhere, am I?
Well, it's very funny that you didn't notice that I read the last sentence backwards. And if you weren't asleep, what were you doing with your eyes closed?
I got smoke in him. And I was resting him for a minute. Haven't I got a right to rest him for a minute?
And I suppose it rests your eyes to breathe through your mouth and to hold your head way over to one side.
Yes, it does. What do you think of that?
Yeah, to go on. To read your newspaper. That's just about your mental speed.
I'm perfectly willing to read books in this set if you pick any decent ones.
Yes, you are.
What do you mean, yes, you are?
Oh, just what I said.
This discussion goes on for about 10 minutes until each party locks themselves in their own bedroom.
Portland cement is the finely pulverized product resulting from the calcination to incipient fusion of an intimate mixture of properly proportioned argillaceous and calcareous materials, and to which no addition greater than 3% has been made subsequent to calcination. That, in a word, is the keynote of H. Kallen-Campbell's How to Use Cement for Concrete Construction. In case you should never read any more of the book, you'll have that. But to the reader who's not satisfied with this taste of the secret of cement construction and who reads on into Mr. Campbell's work, there is revealed a veritable mine of information. And in the light of the recent turn of events, one might even call it significant. Well, any turn of events will do. The first chapter is given over to a plea for concrete. Judging from the claims made for concrete by Mr. Campbell, it will accomplish everything that a return to a Republican administration would do and wouldn't be anywhere near so costly. It will make your barn fireproof. It will ensure clean milk for your children. It will provide safe housing for your automobile. Farm prosperity and concrete go hand in hand. Now, in case there are any other members of society who've been with me in thinking that Portland cement is a product of Portland, Maine, or Portland, Oregon, might as well be stated here and now, America had nothing to do with the founding of the industry. The lucky Portland is an island off the south coast of England. In a bright, sunny afternoon in May 1824, Joseph Asbden, an intelligent bricklayer of Leeds, England, was carelessly calcinating a mixture of limestone and clay, as bricklayers often do on their days off, and he suddenly discovered, on reducing the resulting clinker to a powder, that this substance, on hardening, resembled nothing so much as the yellow-gray stone found in the quarries on the Isle of Portland. How Joe knew what grew on the Isle of Portland when his home was in Leeds is not explained. Maybe he spent his summers at the Portland house, within 3 minutes of the bathing beach. At any rate, on discovering the remarkable similarity between the mess he had cooked up and Portland stone, he called to his wife and said,
Eunice, come here for a minute. What's that remind you of?
The usually cheerful brow of Eunice Aspen clouded for a fraction of a second.
That night up at Burton Eggnos.
No, no, my dear. Anyone could see that this here substance is a dead bringer for Portland stone. And I'm going to make heaps and heaps of it and call it Portland cement. Little enough I can do for the old island.
Oh.
And so that's how Portland cement was named. Rumor hath it that the first Portland cement in America was made at Allentown, Pennsylvania in 1875. But I wouldn't want to be quoted on that. I will say that the total annual production in this country is now over 90 million barrels. It's interesting to note that cement is usually packed in cloth sacks, although sometimes paper bags are used. A charge is made for packing cement in paper bags, the book says. These, of course, are not redeemable. Well, one can understand they're not wanting to take back a paper bag in which cement's been wrapped. The wonder is the bag lasts until you get it home. I tried to take 6 cantaloupes home in a paper bag the other night. Had a bad enough time with it. Cement, when in good form, it must be much worse than cantaloupe. The redeemable remnants of the bag must be negligible. But why charge extra for using paper bags? That seems like adding whatever it is you add to injury. Apologies rather than an extra charge should be in order. However, I suppose these cement people know their business. I shall know enough to watch out, however, and insist on having whatever cement I may be called upon to carry home done up in a cloth sack. Not in a paper bag, if you please, I shall say very politely to the clerk.
The story of a... organism with a heart. Of all forms of animal life, the polyp is probably the most neglected by fanciers. People seem willing to pay attention to anything. Cats, lizards, canaries, even fish. But simply because the polyp is reserved by nature and not given to showing off or wearing its heart on its sleeve, it is left alone under the sea to slave away at coral building, with never a kind word or a pat on the tentacles from anybody. It is quite by accident that I was brought face to face with the human side of a polyp. I've been working on the thesis of emotional crises of sponge life, and came upon a polyp formation on a piece of coral in the course of my laboratory work. To say that I was astounded would be putting it mildly. I was surprised. The difficulty in research work in this field came in isolating a single polyp from the rest of the order, to study the personal peculiarities of the little organism, for, as is so often the case, even I fear with us great big humans sometimes, the individual behaves entirely different in manner in private from the one he adopts when he's in a crowd with others. And the polyp, among all creatures, has a minimum of time to himself in which to sit down and think. There's always a crowd of other polyps dropping in on him, urging him to make a fourth in a string of coral beads, or just to come out and stick around on a rock for the sake of good fellowship. The one which I finally succeeded in isolating was an engaging organism with a provocative manner, and a little way of wrinkling up its ectoderm which put you at once at your ease. There could be no formality about your relations with this polyp 5 minutes after your first meeting. You were just like one big family. Although I have no desire to retail gossip, I think that readers of this treatise ought to be made aware of the fact, if indeed they do not already know it, that a polyp is really neither one thing nor another in matters of gender. One day it might be a little boy polyp, and another day a little girl. When everything seems to be going wrong, it may decide that it will be neither a boy or a girl, and it will just drift. I think that if we big human cousins of the polyp were to follow the example set by these lowliest of God's creatures in this matter, we all would find ourselves much better off in the end. Am I not right, little polyp? What was my surprise then to discover that my little friend one day was in a very gloomy and morose mood. It refused the peanut butter which I had brought it, and I observed through the microscope that it was shaking with sobs. Lifting it up with a pair of pincers, I took it over the window to let it watch the autumn fields go by. A diversion which had in the past never failed to amuse, but I could see that it was not interested. A tune from the Victrola fell equally flat, even though I set my little charge in the center of the disc and allowed it to revolve at a dizzying pace, which frolic usually sent into spasms of excited giggling. Something was wrong. It was under emotional stress of the most racking kind. I consulted Klutzinger's De Cordologie die Roman Nurse, and there I found at an early age the polyp is quite likely to become the victim of sentimental passion, which is directed at its own self. In other words, my tiny companion was in love with itself, bitterly, desperately, and overhealed in love. In an attempt to divert it from this madness, I took it on an extended tour of the continent, visiting all the old cathedrals and stopping at none but the best hotels. The malady grew worse instead of better. I thought that perhaps the warm sun of Granada would bring the color back into those pale tentacles. But there, the inevitable romance in that soft air was only fueled by the flaming, and in the shadows of the Alhambra, my little polyp gave up the fight. Died of a broken heart. without ever declaring its love to itself. I returned to America shortly after, not a little chastened by what I had witnessed. Nature's wonders in the realms of passion.
It's high time that someone came out with a clear statement of the international financial situation. For weeks and weeks, officials have been rushing about holding conferences and councils, having their pictures taken going up and down the steps of buildings. And then after each conference, the newspapers have printed a lot of figures showing the latest returns and how much money Germany owes the bank. And none of it means anything. Now, there is a certain principle which is to be followed in all financial discussions involving sums over $100. And there's probably not more than $100 in actual cash in circulation today. That is, if you were to call in all the bills and the silver and the gold in the country by noon tomorrow and pile them up on the table, you would find you had just about $100. With perhaps several Canadian pennies and a few peppermint lights. All the rest of the money you hear about doesn't exist. It's just conversation money. When you hear a transaction involving $50 million, it means that one firm wrote $50 million on a piece of paper and gave it to another firm. And then the other firm went home and said, "Look, Mom, I got $50 million. But when Mom asked for $1.25 out of it to pay the man who washes the windows, the answer probably was that the firm hadn't got more than 70 cents in cash. This is the principle of finance. So long as you can pronounce any number over 1,000, you have that much money. You can't work this scheme with the shoe store man or the restaurant owner, but it goes big on Wall Street and other international financial services. This much understood, we see that when the Allies demanded 132 billion gold marks from Germany, they know very well that nobody in Germany has ever seen 132 billion gold marks and never will. A more surprised and disappointed lot of boys you couldn't ask to see than the Supreme Financial Council would be if Germany would actually send them a money order for the full amount demanded. What they mean is, taken all in all, Germany owes the world 132 billion gold marks plus car fare. This includes everything: breakage, meals sent to the room, goodwill, everything. And now it is understood that if they really meant this, Germany wouldn't even draw cards. So the principle of on which this thing is figured out is as follows. Watch closely. There is a trick. You put down a lot of figures, like this. Any figures will do, so long as you can't read them quickly. 132 billion gold marks. $33 billion on a current value basis. And $21 billion on reparation account plus 12.5 yearly tax on German exports. 11 billion gold fish. $1.35 amusement tax. 866,000 miles diameter of the sun. 2 billion. 27 billion. 31 billion, and then you add them all together and subtract the number you first thought of. This leaves 11, and the card you hold in your hand is the 7 of diamonds. Am I right?
The reliance of young mothers on Dr. Emmett Holt's The Care and Feeding of Children has become a national custom. Especially during the early infancy of the first baby, does the sun rise and set by what Holt says. But there are several questions which come to mind which are not included in this handy questionnaire arranged by the noted child specialist, and as he's probably too busy to answer them himself, we have compiled an appendix which he may incorporate in the next edition of his book, if he cares to. If not, of course, he doesn't care to, it isn't compulsory. Bathing. Yes.
What should the parent wear while bathing the child?
A rubber loincloth will usually be sufficient, or perhaps a pair of elbow guards and anti-skid gloves. A bath should never be given a child until at least 1 hour after eating. That is, after the parent has eaten.
Oh, and what are the objections for face cloths as a means of bathing children?
These are too easily swallowed. After 6 or 7 wet face cloths have been swallowed, the child is likely to become heavy and lethargic.
But under what circumstances can the daily bath be omitted?
Oh, almost any excuse will do. The bathroom may be too cold or too hot, or the child may be too sleepy or wide awake. The parent may have a lame knee, lead poisoning, and anyway, the child had a good bath yesterday. Clothing, yeah.
How should the infant be held during dressing and undressing?
Any carpenter will be glad to sell you a vise, which you can attach to the edge of a table. Place the infant in the vise and turn the screw until there is a slight redness under pressure. So be careful not to turn it too tight or the child will resent it. But on the other hand, care should be taken not to leave it too loose, otherwise the child will be constantly falling out on the floor and you'll never get it dressed that way.
I'll follow up. What are the most important items in the baby's clothing?
The safety pins, which are usually in the bureau in the next room. Weight.
How should a child be weighed?
Place the child in the scales. The father then should sit on top of the child to hold him down, weigh the child and the father together, then deduct the father's weight from the gross tonnage and the weight of the child is the result. Fresh air.
Well, what are the objections to an infant sleeping out of doors?
Sleeping out of doors in the city is all right. But children sleeping out of doors in the country are likely to be kissed by wandering cows and things. This should never be permitted under any circumstances. Development.
When does the infant first laugh aloud?
When the father tries to pin the first diaper on.
When at 2 years the child has made no attempt to talk, what should be suspected?
That it hasn't yet seen anyone worth talking to. Feeding?
What should not be fed a child?
Ripe olives. Next.
How do we know how much food a healthy child needs?
By listening carefully.
Which parent should go and get the child's early morning bottle?
The one able to feign sleep the best.
Malignant mirrors. Now, as a rule, I try not to look into mirrors any more than is absolutely necessary. Things are depressing enough as they are without going out of my way to make myself miserable. But every once in a while, it's unavoidable. There are certain mirrors in town with which I am brought face to face on occasion, and there's nothing to do but make the best of it. I've come to classify them according to the harshness which they fling the truth into my face. I am unquestionably at my worst in the mirror before which I try on hats. I may have been going all winter thinking of other things, dwelling on what people tell me is really a splendid spiritual side to my nature, thinking of myself as rather a fine sort of person, not dashing perhaps, but one from whose countenance shines a great light of honesty and courage, which even more is to be desired than physical beauty. I rather imagine that little children on the street and grizzled Supreme Court justices out for a walk turn as I pass and say, "A fine face, plain but fine." And then I go in to buy a hat. The mirror on the hat store is triplicate, so that you see yourself not only head on, but from each side. The appearance that I present in this mirror is that of 3 police department photographs, showing all possible approaches to the face of Harry Duchamps, alias Harry Duval, alias Harry Duffy, wanted in Rochester for the murder of Nellie Lubitsch, age 5. All that's missing is a longitudinal scar across my right cheek. I never have a meaner face than when I'm in a hat store mirror. I can stand in not being handsome. I can even stand looking weak in an attractive man about town sort of way. But the right-hand mirror there confronts me with a hangdog face, the face of a yellow craven, while at the left leers even more repulsive type, sensually cruel. Furthermore, even though I've had my hair cut that day, there's an unkept fringe showing above my collar. A whip at 14 that looks so well on the young man in the catalog, and it seems to be worn by a Marine guide when he goes to Portland for a day. My suit needs pressing, and there's a general air of its having been given to me along with $10 by the state on my departure from Sing Sing the day before. But for an unfavorable full-length gait, nothing can compare with the one that I get of myself as I pass the shoe store mirror. They've got a mirror in the window so that it catches the reflection of people as they step on the curb. When there are other forms in the picture, it's not always easy to identify yourself at first, especially at a distance. And every morning on my way to work, unless I deliberately avert my face, I am mortified to discover that that unpleasant-looking man with the rather effeminate, swinging gait, whom I see mincing along through the crowd, is none other than myself. The only good mirror on the list is the one in the elevator of my clothing store. Now there's a subdued light in the car, a sort of golden glow which softens and idealizes, and the mirror shows only 2/3 length, making it impossible to see how badly the cuffs of my trousers bag over the tops of my shoes. Here, I become myself again. I've even thought that I might be handsome if I paid as much attention to my looks as some men do. In this mirror, my clothes look, for the last time, similar as they look on a well-dressed man. A hat which is in every respect perfect when seen here immediately becomes a senatorial sombrero when I step out of the street. But for the brief space of time when I'm in that elevator, I am distinct way, clean cut, a splendid figure of a man that the original blueprints called for. I wonder if it takes much experience to run an elevator. For if it doesn't, I would like to make my life work running that car with the magic mirror. Tony Extract, Hugh Kallen, and Mel Summers, the Comedy G's and Robert